Hi. We can get started. I'm Jordan Silva, Director of Managed Services at a company locally called Mirazon. Been doing IT and security stuff for about 20 years or so, maybe, ish. Got some certs from some places. They're neat. Today we're going to talk about pen testing a little bit. I'm not a pen tester, so this is the perspective of a blue team guy. My career has mostly been around managed services, so basically doing IT for other businesses. Ranged from big and small, 10-person companies up to Fortune 500, large enterprise type stuff. Born and raised in Hawaii, so I spend a lot of time out there doing cool things, and now I live here in Kentucky. So pen testing. I'm a blue teamer. I hate pen testers. How many of you are pen testers? You're the bad guys. No, you're not. Blue team is super fun because you get to hang out and patch things, and patching is probably the most exhilarating part of life. That moment where a server doesn't reboot, it really gets the heart pumping. It's nice. Red teamers are jerks who just try to break all your cool stuff. At least that's sort of what we're taught. But they're super useful, so I kind of want to talk about why, because without pen testers, well, we'd probably be in rough shape. But before we get there, I want to talk about some things that aren't pen tests, but sometimes people say they are. Still useful, but definitely not pen tests. First up, phone scans. How many of you have ever said, hey, I'm going to go pen test your network, and then ran a Nessus scan and gave them the report and been like, gotcha? It's not pen testing. Vulnerability scanning, super important, right? Helps us understand what vulnerabilities exist in a network. It could be part of a pen test, probably the beginning of it maybe, but it definitely is not in itself a pen test. I was talking to a consultant a while back, and I was trying to get to understand what they offered as a service because they were interested in partnering with us, and they were like, we do pen test light. I'm like, what's pen test light? That's kind of a new term for me. He's like, we run a Nessus scan. I'm like, that's not pen testing at all. Cool, man. Like, it's very light. But vulnerability scans, a super important part of a security program overall, right? But probably not pen testing. So if you're out there running vuln scans, good, very important thing. Please don't say you're pen testing. Automated pen testing, fancy vuln scans. Automated pen testing is getting more and more popular. How many of you guys have used a tool like ThreatMate or Vonahai, or there's a bunch of them at this point? They're cool, right? Like they go out, they find the vulnerability, then they execute some scripts against it. And it's sort of like the idea of pen testing where you're seeing if the vulnerability can actually be exploited. You're seeing if you can manipulate something in a way that maybe you thought, but it lacks kind of the nuance of a human being able to do something novel. It lacks the ability to be contextually aware sometimes, and it definitely lacks the ability to mess with the human element of security probably, unless you're doing some phishing stuff maybe. So again, super, super helpful. They're good tools. You should put them in your arsenal, but probably don't call it just pen testing without the asterisk. Anybody kind of disagree with that? Cool, no salespeople here.
Patrick Gray of the Risky Business Podcast put it best. He said every 5 years they just reinvent vuln scanning and throw a new name on it.
And that's what, and like, granted, it's a cool evolution of that, right? Like vuln scanning is, traditional. It's like here, beep boop, run the scan, gives you a big report, says Java's out of date 800 times and tells you how terrible you are as a result of that. Like, it's a good report, 700 pages long, like, it's fancy for the executives. This takes it another level. It's like, no, this time we're going to exploit those vulnerabilities, maybe. And I like it. I think it's helpful. It saves time. You can do it consistently because it's automated. Like, that has a lot of value. Like, pen testing can be expensive because humans are expensive. So this adds a little bit of value, and it does one step beyond what traditional, vuln scanning would do. So I'm not here to bag on it. I'm just here to say it's probably not what you should be after if you're looking for a traditional pen test and you don't get the same full value that we're going to talk about as a blue teamer. Neat, though. All right. So what is pen testing? I went and stole some definitions because it's defined in places, because we have to do it sometimes. NIST says security tests in which evaluators mimic real-world attackers in an attempt to identify ways to circumvent security. I think the key phrase here is evaluators mimic real-world attacks. That's important. You want a human probably doing that because when humans are the bad guys, it's a lot harder to beat them. I like to joke with my help desk that the difference between a help desk and a SOC is help desks are fighting incompetence of vendors like Dell and their stuff breaking. SOCs have to fight competent bad guys half the time because they can think and work around a problem. Both kind of suck sometimes, but one of them is getting better generally. Dell will never get better. And the CIS calls it just testing the effectiveness and resiliency of enterprise assets by identifying and exploiting weaknesses and controls. And I think that's even a more apt kind of description, right? Because It's not explicitly technology that it's targeting. It's targeting the controls in your environment, whether they're administrative, whether they're physical, whether they're technical, and looking for any gaps or cracks or anything where they can kind of sneak around those controls. And I think that's the essence of a good pen test, is you have to cover all three, generally at some point in time. Anybody disagree with these or other definitions that you prefer? I like these. It's also important to understand what these say, because if you're going after one of these compliance frameworks, you probably have to meet the definition of it. Some others include explicit manual human intervention to avoid the whole automated pen test discussion, things like that. So definitions are nuanced, but I think these capture the gist pretty well. And as we get into them, there's a couple different kinds of pen tests we do at a high level, right? You can do black box testing, white box testing, gray box testing. You can go physical, you can do administrative, you can do all kinds of internal and external. But really at a high level, what we're talking about, and our red teamers can check me on this, again, I'm just a dumb blue team guy who patches stuff. This is kind of the idea. Black boxing, you don't give the good guy or the red teamer an advantage. You let them pretend they're the bad guy outside and let them deal with it. White boxing was always my least favorite, because they would send me a list of things I had to whitelist to let them into my network. And I'm like, bro, if you're good at this, why am I giving you any advantage? And the reality is it's just helpful to get to the point, which is help them find bad things that you missed. So as a blue teamer, I used to always get really frustrated here, because they'd be like, hey, we can't scan your environment because your firewall's blocking it. I'm like, yeah, no shit, that's the point. I was like, so give me a pass and let's move on with our lives. But the reality is, like, you want them to find stuff. You want to understand that eventually that first layer of security, where maybe you're just kind of blacklisting something, is going to break. You want them to have the advantage of being able to see in the environment without going through the fluff of breaking in first, so you get the data, right? So all three of these are really important.
Also helps with inside a threat.
Yeah, exactly, right? Like, the whole idea of presumed compromise also comes into play, right? Like, let's pretend that we know for sure someone is going to get compromised and they will get in your network. What happens then? Or like you said, insider threat, they're going to know the inside. Also helps you find things that people might accidentally break your network with. So understand that when you're going down the road of pen testing, these are like some of the words you might see if you're hiring a pen tester, and they might ask you kind of what kind of pen test you want to do. There's different kinds. And we'll talk about a little bit about like when you should be doing pen testing and stuff like that in a bit. But first, just kind of getting some vocabulary out of the way. Stages. Again, anytime you do go through a pen test engagement, all of these have value as a blue teamer, right? We want to talk about planning, probably the most important. What are you trying to get out of this thing? As a blue teamer, you should be sitting there going, well, what do I think I'm good at? Have them test that. What do you think you're bad at? Probably just go fix that and worry about a pen test later. But the planning phase is really, really important. Like, what are you hoping to achieve from this whole bit? What is the weakness that you're hoping they test? What are you trying to prove works or doesn't work? Bad planning, bad results, typically. Reconnaissance. You want to give people a time to look around, figure stuff out. That's part of the gig. Reconnaissance in itself is part of your defense, right? Are things easy to find in your environment? Did you notice them doing the reconnaissance is something you should be looking for, right? Externally, there's a lot of noise. You probably aren't going to worry too much about an external like port scan or something like that. It's just going to happen. You're on the internet. Somebody randomly running Nmap across your internal network, you might want to be aware. Right? So even the reconnaissance phases, as they're going through this stuff, it's time to start figuring out if you're aware that they're there and how you could find people. Getting into exploitation. Exploitation should be noisy in your environment typically. When you're going through these phases, every one of these should be giving you kind of an idea of where should you be detecting, right? When you think about security, it's not just defense anymore, it's detection and response. These are all the areas where you should start being alerted of stuff. So as you're going through these phases, you need to kind of understand that each of these is part of a real kill chain as well. But as part of our pen test, where should you start seeing the pen tester, and at what point should you be worried that you don't? Is probably a really good question. Pen tests are neat when you're the one managing them, because on one hand, you're like, man, I don't want to waste my SOC's time. So you're like, should I tell them that there's a pen test? The other side of you is like, boy, I want to know if they see this stuff. And then you start getting really worried because you're like, hey, there's a pen test running and no one's come to me yet and said anything is wrong. And you don't know if they're just really, really smart and figured out it was a tester, or if they're not and your detections are bad and you just don't know that there's an attacker in your network. Both are terrifying, and which is why we hate pen testers. At least the bad guy does the courtesy of not telling you until after they're done, right? Like, you don't have to worry the whole time, just at the very end when they encrypted all your stuff. So it relieves the stress in a lot of ways. Pen testers are brutal. No. We go through this exploitation and post-exploitation area, and it's really important, right? Like, we got to figure out if those vulnerabilities are actually vulnerabilities or if they're just kind of fluff. And we want to figure out what happens after they're exploited. And then the reporting phase. How many of you want to be a pen tester if you're not already one?
I did want to add one thing. A great part of the exploitation phase is if your SOC is catching things, execute your procedures for containment immediately.
Absolutely.
And I found it was harder to get other groups to shut things down than it was for us to detect.
Yeah. That's a really good point. It's one of those things when we do tabletop exercises, they're like, we'd isolate. I'm like, how? Right? I'm a big fan of like D&D style tabletop exercise. So I'm like, roll the dice. How are you isolating this? It's like I rolled a 3. It's like your EDR didn't work. Now what? They're like, pull the plug. I'm like, it's a building 80 miles away. Who are you calling? Is your network cabinet that well labeled that they can pull the plug? Like, no, and that's the thing, right? Like when we start going through these, you're right. It's about testing those things, and that's why, you got to make the call when you're going through the test whether this is going to be a true exercise, or if you just tell your SOC manager, hey, the minute they see it, just tap them on the shoulder, tell them, let them go and be quiet. Like, there's a couple ways to approach this. I like as long as it doesn't cause too much disruption, I like to let people do their thing and see how it goes. It's a good part of the test. It's high value, but it can cause disruptions.
I actually wanted to test the entire, let's stop them, and then let them restart. We know they're there.
And see how it rolls. And that's part of the planning. You got to make those decisions. Same thing with like phishing tests. It's, hey, somebody reported phishing. Do you let your team know or do you let them do their investigation? It depends on what your outcome. If you're trying to figure out if that response path works, you got to let them kind of run with it. If you're just seeing if users are going to click on phishing emails, you can probably give them a heads up and just say, hey, just wait for the responses. We're expecting this. But that's all part of the planning. It's really understanding what outcome are you looking for. And unless you're a fairly small organization, you're going to be doing this in chunks. You're probably never going to hire a pen tester to just do the whole thing all at once because it's expensive, it's disruptive, it's time consuming, and really you're not going to be able to fix everything at once anyway. So focus on what you're actually trying to achieve out of this, right? Like if your goal is, I want to know if, we're susceptible to phishing and ransomware as a thing. Have the pen tester focus on that type of activity. And that all comes into that planning stage. And then reporting. My favorite part of pen test is going through the reports. Like it's the worst as the recipient of it because pen testers are often really good. If you hire good ones, they're gonna find stuff. Like it's nice when you go through like an external pen test and they're like, man, we couldn't find anything. Like, yeah, good job. But like most of the time, I'm an MSP. We're managing hundreds and hundreds of networks at times. People are making changes all the time. The pen tester is going to find something internally, and that's why we pay them. And you just wait for that report to show up, and you're like, man, I hope it's not something stupid. Like if they do something neat, they're like, hey, I found this cool patch that was just released a week ago, and you guys didn't get there yet, and I was able to exploit it. You're like, all right, this would have been caught in a month. We're fine. But if it's like, hey, you're running this old ERP, it's from 1992, and you're like, fuck, I know, I told them to upgrade that thing, and they're like, by the way, you're like, I hate you, why did I pay you $20,000 to remind me that that thing still exists, right? Like, it's this moment of just contention that's a little rough, but reporting is the final stage, so when you're scoping pen tests and you're engaging, make sure all these exist. At the end of it, without a really concise report, you're not gonna get the value you probably need out of it as a defender. It'll help you sell to your executives the changes you've probably been begging for weeks or months or years, but it's probably the best outcome of the event that you need. So when I look for pen testing partners, one of the first things I ask for is their examples of reports. If they say, hey, we just kind of jot down some notes, they're not a good partner. One, you'll never know what they were actually able to accomplish. Like if they come back and say, hey, you're super secure, we didn't find anything, maybe they just didn't do anything. Maybe they're just bad at their jobs. You got to have a way to validate that the work was done in that reporting phase. I think it's the thing people least expect about being a pen tester is their most used tool is Word, but also it's the most valuable thing, even though it just doesn't seem like that when you're in the muck of it, right? Like sometimes them just telling you how they broke into your RDP server that you didn't have MFA on that was publicly available. They just say they did it, right? Like, no, having a report that writes it out nicely so you can embarrass yourself is better. But stages, good. And so what's the point, right? The point of all of this is that security is important as a blue teamer. Your job is to keep things secure. We need to know if vulnerabilities exist. Vuln scanning helps you with that. But vuln scanning is like surface level. It tells you if a vulnerability could be present. It doesn't tell you if it's exploitable. It doesn't tell you what the outcome of that exploit will generally be. It doesn't have the context of the system it's run on generally, unless you go back and say, okay, well, you know, it has log4j, but what does that really give an attacker the ability to see in this system? Pentesters, good ones, will give you that context back so you understand the risk associated with the vulnerability a lot better and the impact of that in your environment. Our goal here is strengthen the security posture. It's like going to the gym a little bit, right? Like, it's uncomfortable, you get sweaty, but at the end you're probably better if you continuously do things and do things correctly. Pen testing is kind of the goal there, is we want stronger security posture. We want to be better, so we have to get uncomfortable for a little while. And we need to address security weaknesses, so having somebody point those out. Sometimes we know them, sometimes we don't. Sometimes we kind of know they exist, but we don't understand how bad they are. I've been in that position a bunch of times where I'm like, yeah, I knew that was bad, but I didn't know it was that bad. Like, I didn't know that was a path to like domain admin. I just thought it was like, you know, worst case, they get a user account that I don't really care about. And then they just do their magic and they're like, nah, here we go. And it's a much worse day than you thought. So I think it's really, really important that we understand that these are all the objectives of why we're doing this stuff. And it can feel crappy during it because your whole job was to prevent them from being able to do all this. But ultimately, we're all imperfect. So letting somebody help is good. Assessment of security measures. Again, we're here to test all security measures and the effectiveness of them. It's really easy to put controls in place. It's really hard to be disciplined and keep them, right? Especially things like policies and procedures. Like, you can write things down all day. Getting a company to follow it, that's much harder. Technical controls get changed all the time. People break things when they're testing and forget to put them back. New applications get installed and we break all the previous changes we made along the way. Somebody cries because their 1996 printer stopped working, so you turn SMB back on and everything's ruined after all that hard work. Like, everybody knows it's true. It's always the printers. But the idea here is that we're continuously trying to measure this stuff, and because it's always moving, you have to always be testing. And when you're really close to the problem, like, it's hard to know that because you're in it. You're saying, no, I already took care of that last year. We went through a big project. I remember turning all this off. And you skip over it because you know that's fixed. And then it's not because somebody made a change. Having somebody who has a little bit of distance coming in, telling you it's broken again, it's a good checkup. So understand that this is all about that continual adjustment and continual improvement. And yeah, generally the insights, and the other thing is, pen testers are paid to stay good at this, I guess would be the other thing, right? Like, we're paid to defend and learn how to manage our infrastructure. Usually that kind of puts you in a silo a little bit, unless you're very, very good about keeping outside and understanding what new threats look like and learning every application that comes into the environment. Pen testers are good at learning all that stuff because it's their job. They just have to be good at breaking in. Learning how to defend everything all the time, pretty hard. So rely on people who learn how to break in, and they can kind of point out the flaws a little bit easier. So we'll skip through some of these. All right, so when should you get a pen test? How frequently should companies pen test? Who has an answer?
Continuously.
Continuously. Not the people who are paid to pen test. No. What's the answer there? Like, when should you get your first pen test? Immediately? Maybe.
Or maybe at least after blue team's established.
Yeah. Quarterly? Could be. Should you do anything before you get a pen test? Like, in order of priority, where does pen testing fall in the security structure and organization?
Take care of your known vulnerabilities first.
Yeah. I think that's a pretty good gist of it, right? Like, pen testing is important, but it's a mature activity. This is not a day one thing you do as a business. It'd be like going in as an electrician before, like, the foundation is poured and saying, I'm ready. It's like, there's no framework, there's no foundation, you're not ready. Or sending in an inspector and they're like, the house isn't built, what am I here for? Like, yeah, I can get in, you don't even have doors yet, bro. Like, it's a little bit early on the whole thing. So pen testing should be treated like a mature activity. You have to have the ability to, one, do something with the data, but two, get rid of the low-hanging fruit. Don't make the guys day easy. You're gonna pay them a bunch of money. They're gonna take time. Like, do what you can first. SIS, are you guys all familiar with SIS 18? Some, yes. Sys 18 or 18 controls inherited from SANS. It used to be the SANS 20. But it's a framework that just guides general cybersecurity for businesses of all sizes. It's broken into 3 implementation groups. IG1, which is like foundational cybersecurity health stuff. Every business can do it. IG2 is like you're getting a little mature, you're being pretty good at cybersecurity. IG3 is like you're really good at cybersecurity. Sys says external pen tests are an IG2 thing. So you have a pen tester try to break into your network from the outside. Internal pen tests are an IG3 thing. They don't expect businesses to be doing this in the first years of their cybersecurity programs because there's so much other stuff you should be getting done ahead of it to be ready for that test that it's a waste of time to have somebody come in and just point at all the things you didn't do, right? When you look at other frameworks like CMMC, they don't even require pen tests at level 1 or 2 because, again, there's so much groundwork that should generally be getting done to make this a valuable program that you should be spending your effort there, probably. So you can have a pen tester come in early, but if you haven't ever done a vuln scan, you're going to lose. Like, they're going to just come back with a really, really big report of things you probably could have found in that automated thing we talked about. If you haven't gone through and got a good inventory to start with, they'll build you a really nice inventory of things they exploited. It's a really expensive way to go get that inventory list, right? Like, do yourselves the favor and kind of get some of this foundational stuff done first if you want the real value out of this. Let's see. And make sure you already have the basics covered, like a patch program. And as a blue teamer, this is the stuff you should be focusing on day to day, right? Is, do you have a good inventory of assets? What happens if you don't have a good inventory? Why is that like control 1?
You can only protect what you know about.
Yeah. If you don't know it's there, you're not going to be patching it. You're not protecting it. You know who will find it? The pen tester, because they're going to be looking for all the things you didn't know about. So go out there, get an inventory, and make sure it's clean. And during that planning phase, show them your inventory. Help them understand what you believe to exist. So when they see something weird, they can say, hey, actually, we found this whole network. And I've seen that before. It's like, oh, right, that was that lab we stood up. It's like, yeah, that hasn't been patched in 3 years, and it has a WAN interface. Like, that's a bad day, but they'll find it. But you got to start with your own kind of due diligence here. Make sure you have a program in place to patch stuff, or again, you're toast. Like, that's like table stakes, right? Then do the vuln scan. Like, it's important. It's good. It wasn't at the beginning to make fun of. It was just not pen testing. So do that yourself. Run the scan. Have another company run it with you if you want that. That's okay. They can help with that. But understand that they shouldn't be trying to exploit stuff if you have a list this long already of things you could just fix by patching, changing configs, and all that stuff. And make sure MFA is implemented. Like, again, if you're a larger company, a pen test is going to be costing tens of thousands of dollars at times. And if you don't have MFA implemented already, toast. Like, you should have done already, right? Like, these are foundational things that they just need to exist if you really want the value out of this stuff. Otherwise, you could have fixed half the problems first. And I'm all about making pen test jobs harder. So.
It's still crazy to me in 2025, like, still the most common finding is like, implement MFA, because like, we just, sprayed passwords and got in.
Yeah. It's like, fine, you can't have people have good passwords. I get it. They're going to use silly things. MFA it. But I had a call, I think last week with a customer, and they're like, hey, we've been growing. It's been kind of erratic. We really want to focus on cybersecurity this year. We're really serious about it. I'm like, that's cool. Tell me about it. And they go on and they talk about how they just got phished and all this stuff. And I'm like, cool. Do you guys have MFA? They're like, oh, no, we tried to get our CEO to do that last year, and he just said no. I was like, I hate to break it to you, but we can't have a conversation where in one phrase you say, hey, we're serious about cybersecurity, and the second phrase you say, we're not implementing MFA. Like, I can't help you. If you're not willing to do that for even like basic external stuff, it doesn't matter.
Anyone who has an administrative account should have like,
yeah, something.
probably something like a YubiKey, but like even like damn TOTP based.
Anything.
Authenticator.
Yeah, literally anything.
Like you said earlier, though, by doing that report, and say, all right, well, here, the first thing out of the gate is you don't have MFA. Then you hand it to the CEO, and then that's your ticket.
And that is sign of the help, right?
That's
Is,
the way to do it.
yeah.
You make a great point.
No, but, and that is one of the benefits of bringing in that third party is, you know what? Sometimes they just hear that IT guy bitching the whole time about wanting to spend more money. Well, okay, we'll spend the money, and that the expensive guy will tell you that it's actually true. All right, so how does this help us as blue teamers? Learning from someone with a different perspective than you is beneficial. I think this is the biggest one for me. I focus all day long on defense. There's people out there who focus all day long on offense. It'd be silly of me not to want to learn from them. So if you looked at that first slide, I've taken pen testing courses with SANS and things like that, not because I want to be a pen tester. I'm not that creative. I find a lot of good pen testers are really creative people. I'm not, so I'm bad at it. Like I just hit walls and I'm like, I don't know. But I'm pretty good at logically working through systems and making sure they're secure, so I stick on the blue team side, but I wanted to know how they do it. And I think that's important, right? Sitting down with somebody who just approaches their problems differently than you, super beneficial. And good pen testing resources are okay sitting down, usually after the test, and kind of working with you, and during that planning phase to explain some of their approaches or their recommendations on how to implement this stuff correctly. Like those steps alone are really helpful. It's like, oh, I didn't even think about that. That's a cool way to do this. Yeah, let's do it that way. Like they can help you understand the best ways to approach these problems, and they're probably ways you didn't think of doing. A lot of times when you're working in, especially when you're like the internal IT department, you'll hear a lot of people internally who really like the idea of being a pen tester, and they're like, I can do our own pen test. And that's free to the company, so they're like, yeah, neat, whatever, download Kali or something. Like, but it's not the same thing. Like it's fine, but no, it's a different approach, it's a different skill set, it's a different mindset. Take advantage of that. I mean, you want to learn from people who are experts, generally. We can't know everything. This is the other big thing. We spend a lot of time learning how to build secure systems, how to be good systems administrators, how to configure firewalls properly. You can't know how to do all of them really, really well. So you have to rely on a teammate, and sometimes that teammate is a third party you hire to fill in that gap. And that's okay. Like, that's not a weakness, that's just reality. Just like I don't pretend to be our CFO, right? Like, it's just a different skill. Just because they both happen to use computers doesn't mean they're the same job. Right? So the idea that you're supposed to hire people who are experts in something is beneficial, and working with them is good. And it's not like a weakness, right? Because I've heard directors in places ask that, it's like, well, why can't you just do this stuff? It's like, because I don't know how to do this. And it's not because I'm bad at my job, it's because that's not my job, right? It's like asking me why I can't go paint. It's not, I don't know, I'm not a good painter. Like, it's just a different skill. But I think it confuses people in organizations who aren't in IT, because to them, you know, plugs into a wall, has power, has keyboard, same job. Not really. So we have to help people understand this.
It's also great in your own humble.
Huh?
It's also great in your own humble.
Yeah. Were you going to say something? Oh, okay. Cool. Where else? They have distance from the problem. We were talking about this a little bit earlier. Like, when you're in the muck of it, you're going to miss stuff. You're familiar with your environment. You make a lot of assumptions. You have a lot of biases. Being able to just kind of take a step back and look at the thing holistically, they're going to just see things you won't. There's no way around this. Like, it doesn't matter. I was working with a client. They had done they did an external pen test recently, and one of the things they found that I didn't even consider looking at was a benefits management platform that HR outsourced, that at one point had SSO but didn't anymore. Had like a data breach, and we got alerted to the data breach through one of our tools. And when that happened, we checked who had reset their passwords and all that. It was a legacy tool, but they stumbled upon it and were able to actually go and log into that thing. And we never bothered to go log into the third-party system to see what was there. It just wasn't a resource we cared about. It wasn't our responsibility. But they found it, and I was like, that's really interesting. Now, the password didn't work. They weren't able to take that and log into the actual network, but they were able to log in and see useful information for phishing. And it's just because that was something they thought was going to be useful and meaningful. Like, when I saw the data breach, I was like, yep, just make sure the accounts have all had password resets. We don't even have SSO anymore. It doesn't matter. Move on with our life. I'm not the HR person, but they knew better. So it's they just had a different viewpoint on it all. Yeah.
I was gonna say, a lot of companies use a lot of SaaS.
Yep.
And whenever I was doing like risk management, I would ask the SaaS provider for their last 3 pen tests.
Yeah.
Because you could see systemic issues, not just if they had 1 pen test that's
Right.
useless, but if they've had 3, you could see those. And then I had some SaaS providers that would say, you can't scan us. And I was like, the internet scans you every day.
Yeah. It's like, good news, I didn't have to. Shodan did. Thank you.
Yeah. So I always try to make sure that as a blue teamer, those companies understood they have to be secure before we'll work with them.
And I think that's really important as part of like just vendor vetting and that type of program. It's part of it, right? They're all kind of integrated, right? They all have some of your data. They all have resources that are related to you. And today, all that is just fodder for phishing.
Just tell Scatterspot or that system's out of scope.
Yeah, it's out of scope, guy. Like, China's not playing by the rules, guys. Like, this isn't fair. Like, just put a little note in my network. It's like, hey, don't look over here, please. No, but I think perspective is really the big one, and just distance from it. We get in the weeds. And I think it's the next one. Let me see. Yeah, we get jaded, frankly. Like, we get into these situations and environments where if you're working in a large organization, you have technical debt. It's just the reality of it, right? And a lot of small organizations. But you get to this place where you've reported things, you've pushed on things, and like at some point you just give up acknowledging that it's a weakness because you're so used to complaining about it and doing nothing about it that you just sort of forget how bad it actually is. And it's not because you're bad at your job, it's because you don't have endless energy to fight dumb fights. And this goes back to what you were kind of saying, right? Is sometimes just having that third party come in and be like, no, seriously, you have to upgrade this ERP. Like, you have to. It's all your data, and it is full of holes, and they will never be fixed. I know it's expensive, but what's really expensive is going out of business because you didn't. And showing that it's not just hyperbole, it's, no, look, I can exploit it. I stole all the data. I didn't have any credentials. Like, that does help, but a lot of it is it just gets somebody who's not emotionally attached to the environment, whose job wasn't to secure it, to just come in, unbiased, poke around, and say plainly, hey, here's what we were able to do. And again, the good ones are really good about, it's like, hey, I'm not saying you're bad at your job, but I was able to gain domain admin in 8 minutes. Like, and here's how I did it, so I'm gonna help you get better, right? It's just that reassurance and different perspective, and not hindered by bias that you've built over years of taking care of the network. And you should be after that. Like, one of the biggest things we deal with in like threat intelligence and things like that is bias. It's hard. It's very hard to separate yourself from situations, from the work you're doing. It's hard to separate your own mentality from what an attacker might do. We talk a lot about that, right? Like, you can't guess the motives of an attacker or why they would do certain attacks. And because of that, you can't mimic all of them. So you have to let somebody else come in who's not there, who has a different worldview, a different experience, a different background, take a stab at it. Not that kind of stab, different stab. And they can usually give you pretty good results. And you should be open to that. And it's really, really hard because it's really uncomfortable, and it does suck. I've never been happy getting a report that somebody was able to get domain admin in a pen test while I was getting the report. Like, I'm always happy after. Let's see. One of my favorite things is working with companies to, like, once they're done, a lot of the companies I've worked with are really good about helping your team figure out what you missed and how you missed it. This kind of leads into some purple team exercise type stuff, but it's very valuable. Like, if you can sit with an attacker and say, hey, can you show me how you did that while I look at my SIM logs and figure out why I didn't know that you were doing that? Or did I know and I just not have a detection? Did it look like a false positive? Did my SOC see it and just write it off? Like, there's this moment of education where then you can just nerd out with somebody else who's totally passionate about security like you, just from a different worldview. And you can kind of sit there together and watch them do the thing they do, and you're like, that's neat, I wish I knew how to do that. And you're like, there was a log there, we just don't detect on that, that's weird. And you can turn it on, and the next time, you're better. So there's this real-time improvement that can happen when you're in collaborative engagements, and that's really, really neat, and a lot of fun. And that makes it way better than the just handing off a report and trying to figure out what the heck you do at that point. You're like, this all sucks, now what? Versus, okay, I'm gonna sit down with this guy and he can show me exactly how he did this. And it takes some humility sometimes, I think, because sometimes we're just like, yeah, fuck that guy. Like, I don't care how he did it, he cheated. He wouldn't have been able to do that if I didn't whitelist his stupid box. Like, right, like you get defensive, but no, it's just, hey, show me how you did that. What tool did you use? Great, I'm gonna add that to my list of things to research later because that's kind of cool. Don't run the tool yourself immediately in the environment, that's a bad idea. But take it home, take it to your lab, play around with it, learn. And then next time, before your next pen test, look for that stuff. Go look at the old report. Did we fix all these things we said we did? Did we detect on these now? Have we gotten detection since then? Should I go back and look at the last 90 days to see if this stuff happened, right? That goes into like the threat hunting side of things, is now that I'm detecting on it, let's make sure a bad guy hadn't done this recently in my logs, and you can kind of start looking through that kind of stuff. So there's this immediate value. That's pretty neat. But ultimately, somebody's gonna find this stuff, right? Like, at the end of the day, vulnerabilities in your environment are going to be found, they're going to be exploited. You can choose to do it on your terms and pay the person who will then give you the advice on how to fix it, or you can pay the person for your files back. Like, that's sort of the reality of all this is you can avoid all this and pretend it doesn't exist and then just wait for somebody to find it on their time. And this is one of those things where I talk to teams a lot where it's like, there's not a lot of shortcuts in security. Like, you can cut corners and you can save some money short term. Usually you pay that back in incident response later. That's a conversation I have with my clients all the time, and most businesses would prefer to plan their spending instead of spending it at 3 o'clock on a Friday on a long weekend, right? Like, that's, like, bad guys don't care about your budget schedule. They don't care about your holidays. They don't care about when you're shorthanded. At least if you're paying a pen tester, you can plan when this stuff happens and when you spend the money and when you're gonna find it. You're spending the money either way at some point. Like, it's gonna get spent, but ideally it gets spent with a good guy who shows you how to improve, not a bad guy in incident response, in ransom, in whatever you're paying to kind of get back from an attack. So that's kind of the idea. So from a blue team perspective, this is what you should be aiming for, is education, perspective, and just the reality that someone's gonna find this stuff. It probably won't be you, because if it was you, you would have fixed it already, and there's probably more than you can find. It's just the reality. Does that kind of make sense? All right, that's kind of, I think that's it, yeah. Questions, thoughts, disagreements?
Yeah, I usually take the view that if I'm vulnerable, I'd sooner hear about it from the pen tester than from CNN.
Yeah. Yeah, they probably won't put your name in a paper.
I was thinking a little perspective on kind of the progression, and also kind of talk a little bit about red teaming, which, you know, it's kind of like the next level beyond pen testing.
Yeah.
You know, I agree with you. I always, when I used to talk to clients, I used to specifically read a red teaming practice. Now I'm in charge of more general pen testing. But half the exploration with clients when they ask you about, like, oh, we want a red team, it's like, do you really want a red team?
Yeah.
Is that really what you need? Is your definition of red team the same as mine? Because I see red teaming as like, you know, you get a definition of pen testing as, you know, assessing the systems for vulnerabilities, see if there's things you can chain together or exploit. And the red teaming is really like kicking the tires of the blue team. Like, can the blue team detect and respond successfully to an attack?
Yeah.
You know, are they going to be seeing the stuff I'm doing? And I had a salesperson in my old job had a great analogy. She said, all those things are important. Like, you should, just because you've gotten to the level you can do red and purple doesn't mean you stop doing pen testing and vulnerability scanning. There's things you should do regularly. They're good. She likened it to math. It's like, just because you know how to do trigonometry doesn't mean you had to, like, you don't need to do multiplication and addition anymore. They're all important. You know, they're all just, like, you know, things you build upon.
And they get easier. Is like, vuln scanning when you first start, it's a lot of work, it's a lot of time, it's a lot of effort, but when you consistently do it, it's now incrementally faster, easier, and smoother each time, right?
And if you skip steps, then you're just paying more, you know, for, like, say, if you don't do vuln scanning and you go straight to pen testing, it's like, they're just gonna find out, they're just gonna spend, I mean, I've done this before, I've lived this.
Yeah.
I just spent like 4 days writing a report that, like, you could have solved yourself with an ESSA scan, because I'm writing up all the, like,
Yeah.
really low hanging fruit crap that, like, I spent more time finding that than I could have, like, if you've just done that yourself, I could have spent more time digging into, like, the more impactful stuff that a machine won't find.
Exactly.
Like, you know, tearing over your, like, your AD environment to see, like, like, you know, is there, like, unconstrained delegation over here, or there's Kerberos total accounts that are worth something there,
Yep.
or whatever. Same with red teaming. It was like first question I was always asking clients is like, do you have your own in-house SOC, an MSSP, or some combination of the two? And they said no, and I'm like,
Then what are we red teaming here? Yeah.
let's talk about pen testing instead.
Yeah.
So always assuage the salespeople, like, don't worry. Even if they're not ready for red team, we'll just walk them down the ladder and they'll buy a pen test.
Yeah, and later, you can grow them into the next step, but no, it's about what's appropriate now for you and for the team, and what's going to get you the best value, and then later you do the next thing.
And also touch on something you said about like motivations. It's like I usually kind of four that I know is for pen testing and red team. One is like more for pen test would be like compliance.
Yeah.
Which it's kind of a bummer. It's like, oh, you know, a lot of times companies that don't really care about security. They're just
Nope, checking a box.
And auditors on their back. Two would be like, we're trying to validate we're spending in the right places. And that's a good one. And then three is like, we care about security. We really want to find where our gaps are. That's a great one. But honestly, my fourth, and rarer, but my favorite was, I had to fight like hell to get this budget from my C-suite, and they don't invest in security, and I want you to scare the pants off them.
It's valid.
That's my
Like,
favorite one. Like, oh, this is gonna be fun.
yeah, I wish it didn't resort to that, but sometimes it does.
Yeah, like you mentioned about the politics and jadedness. It's like sometimes that's the role we play.
Yeah. What were we going to say?
I like your process too, and the reporting and checking it beforehand.
Yeah.
You'd say, am I gonna get a valid or useful report, and that's really good. So my question is a little simpler now, because you mentioned the phishing test, and the people, humans, they're the biggest danger in so many ways.
Yeah.
What do you think of, like on a phishing test? A lot of times they'll say, be a link, and if someone clicks on it, immediately, and then they might make you go through a little training thing. Do you find that to be more useful than saying, let's not tell them that they did it and see how far we can go? Which is more of a useful tool?
So I'm much more on the reward good behavior than stick bad behavior for the phishing test. I think that, like, the reason people probably failed the phishing test is because they didn't take the training seriously to begin with. Yelling at them isn't going to change that perspective for them. They're going to go sit through the mandatory training. It's going to run on another screen. They're going to be doing whatever they were doing to begin with. So I'm a big advocate of when people do good, calling it out, rewarding it, saying, hey, this is really good. Put them in like a prize drawing at the end of the month. That way everybody sees that and they're like, I would like a gift card for Starbucks. So I need to look for these and I need to click the button when they're bad. So versus the crap, I accidentally clicked on the link and now I have to put up with another 15-minute video that I'm not going to watch. So I think it's like you have to balance that. And then as far as like part of a pen test, it just depends on what you're trying to achieve, right? Like doing a broad who's clicking on the links, I think that's of value so you can focus broad training in the company and kind of get a feel. If you want to see if they're going to enter credentials, if they're going to download a file, I think you need to have a really specific focus on what you're trying to get out of that. You shouldn't probably do that broadly across the whole company, in my opinion, especially if it's a large company, because you're going to introduce kind of chaos into the environments. But I think it's worth doing in some cases. We've done focused attacks like that against executives. So we'd run like a spear phishing campaign where we're explicitly targeting executive teams, even subsets of executive teams as part of an overall pen test. And the idea was that was the scenario we were testing against. So, if I were an attacker who was going to, do this set of things, that's what we'd build the pen test program around. And it would include phishing. It would include, vishing. It would include whatever pieces the attacker felt would be applicable to that. And then we'd see what we can leverage them to do, whether it's, we're going to engage with them and see if we can get them to change an account number. We're going to see if they can get them to set up an account for us. And it's at that level, sometimes it's not even download a file. It's, can I get them to just forward this email to finance for me? Right? And that's what they're looking for. So it's like getting somebody to click on a link isn't very hard. I think it's getting a lot easier, especially with just technology and platforms for phishing being readily available and AI being able to write really good emails now. So I think that part of life is getting easier in a lot of ways, especially if you're doing it as a phishing test, because you're going to be intentionally bypassing all the automated controls to block that stuff. So I think I don't put a lot of weight in a lot of that very broad part of a pen test being a phishing thing. I think it's useful feedback at a low level, but I think there's a lot of value in very explicit types of attacks as part of a bigger picture. It's a good question though.
I would just like to say that there's the defense necessity as well. It's in some areas where I work with the state, there's some public facing computers that are on completely separate networks.
Yeah.
They have weak defense, but that's because you get into nothing. Breaking nothing.
Yeah.
And just it was kind of compared to a padlock. A padlock can be lockpicked, but that means throwaway padlocks are still useful.
Yep.
So it's kind of the same ethic, I guess.
Yeah, context matters, right? And that's why we the vuln scan is, it's surface level. I've seen that 100 times. It's we're going to vuln scan this environment. Great, you have all this stuff. It's what does that really do? It's a lab computer that only has internet access. Is it great if somebody breaks it? No. Is it actually a risk to the organization? Very, very small, probably.
Yeah, and then recently I'm learning that they just installed a NAC system into our whole area, and without telling anybody, and they did it sort of, I don't know, the COT people were getting kind of pissed off because we have to have the ability to image machines, but we lost that ability once they installed it. So I'm just hey guys, I can't do my job. Can you please? Oh, and they're okay, we can switch over. All right. So,
No. It all has to be and that's the gist of security, right? Is it's always this balance and there has to be coordination and things like that. Anytime you're really locking down an environment, you probably got to talk to the people who work in it.
it's how cumbersome is it versus the necessity?
Right. But awesome. Anything else? Otherwise, I think we're about time. Cool. Well, thank you all.